بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبا القاسم محمد. طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوتا غير بيوتكم حتى تستأنسوا وتسلموا على أهلها. صلوات. First of the loudest salawat for the love of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Second, even louder salawat for the love of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. And third, with your loudest voices, for the love of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. The idea of finding one's identity is vital within the life of every human being. It's the idea that we seek to understand ourselves from every angle in our lives. You will find every human being seeks to understand his life, his origin, and indeed his future. And therefore he seeks to maintain this idea in order that he is able to build himself the strongest of identities. Hence we notice Amir al-Mu'mineen, for example, stating to us, "Man arifa nafsah faqad arifa rabbah." The one who understands himself will understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the idea that wherever you may go in your life, you will notice that the world of identity is right within your limits and right within your movements. Hence one notices, as the most trivial of example, one can find his own passport, where you open up this passport and you find your picture, in most cases a picture you couldn't believe you took. You find as well the date of birth written down, and then you find all the stamps which are there, giving you a sense of identity about your past, your present, and your future. One also knows, for example, these days, that the concept of identity is even further seen at airports, that now when Sayyid Ammar has to go through America, he finds that his eyes are checked and his fingers checked and every single part of the body is virtually checked, just to ensure that he hasn't done anything wrong. On the other hand, the people who are trying to investigate are seeking to understand the identity of the people who have come within their land. And that's why you see everywhere in our life, virtually everything we see has an identity. It might be the Ferrari, the badge of the Ferrari, or the badge of the Lamborghini, or the badge of the BMW on every car. You see that it has a particular identity. It might be a particular football team, or as we would call it, a soccer team, who has a badge as its identifier. And you would find even that the human being sometimes is more willing to identify himself with his sports team than with anything else. As an example, we have in Scotland, which is that small part on top of England, we have this area, these two teams. One is called Celtic and the other is called Rangers. And when you look at these two teams, they both are actually identified with another area in life, because Celtic is meant to represent the Catholic school in Christianity, and Rangers is meant to represent the Protestant school. So these fans, when they go to watch the match, they're not concerned so much about the sport. They're more concerned that I'm a Catholic and I'll sit on the Catholic end, and you're a Protestant and you'll sit on the Protestant end. And indeed it led to many wars between them within a stadium where you would think they've come to watch sport. On the contrary, they've come to fight each other about their particular ideologies. So you find how the human being seeks to identify himself, maybe sometimes with a club. And that's why you find many phrases where the word identity is brought out. As an example, the word identity crisis. Many times we hear about this concept of identity crisis, that a person is not sure whether he is Shia. Is he Shia and Lebanese? Is he Shia, Lebanese, American? Is he Shia, Lebanese, American, culturally gifted? Is he Shia, Lebanese, American, culturally gifted, half religious, not that religious, very religious, extreme and religious, fundamentalist religious, or not caring at all? You find what you find in your life is that the human being is constantly trying to understand himself. And that's why many of our youth, for example, sometimes find an identity crisis where they want to act their culture, but they find sometimes that their culture differs with what the religion teaches. As an example, you find someone who wants to have a wedding. He doesn't want no music in his wedding, but he finds that sometimes his auntie or his uncle who is in the crowd thinks that a wedding can never be interesting without music. And before you know it, someone messes up the whole wedding simply because they want to hear one man's voice or one female's voice. The person himself doesn't want, but sometimes he finds that people around him find that this is of the utmost importance, and he finds a clash. Do I maintain my Shia beliefs, or do I maintain my Arab beliefs, as an example? And that's why many divorces have occurred just out of the simple idea that a husband and a wife were not able to identify themselves with what their true realities were. One wanted, for example, a wedding on this hand, and another wanted a wedding which looked towards a different way. Therefore, the human being is constantly trying to understand his identity in order that he builds himself and builds his future. Amongst the areas where identity is seen as being of the utmost importance, and where we see in much of our life, is the area of the world of fashion and the world of clothing. We find that every human being seeks to identify himself with the clothing that he wears. For the world of fashion is arguably one of the biggest industries and will continue to be one of the biggest industries, for the world of clothing is an essential feature in the world today. Hence one notices when one analyzes the fashion industry, you find that only one particular line emerges from this whole idea. And that line is that clothes speak for themselves. As an example, one can look at magazines in the fashion world today, and you will find magazines rating from one way to the other, where they will seek to analyze what is the best collection in the spring-summer season, what's the best collection in the autumn-winter collection. And you will find, for example, a magazine which calls itself Vanity Fair. Imagine how the human being was even willing to call himself the master of vanity, Vanity Fair. And there's other magazines such as Vogue and GQ and a few others which I don't dare to mention just in case someone starts to identify ourselves with a certain magazine. There are certain magazines which are there which seek to show you how many people are concerned about the way they look. Sometimes there is a whole section devoted to suits, one after another. And you will find the pictures of models, one after another, devoted to these suits. And you will be told with a phone number where exactly you have to go and find this particular piece of clothing. Not only in the world of magazines, but you will also find, for example, that many of the supermodels in the world today, they actually attract more attention than the clothes that they wear sometimes. As an example, recently, Mrs. Naomi Campbell and Kate Moss were both in the news in England about not their clothing, but rather about their habits and their everyday lifestyle. Because you see how the human being is so concerned with those who portray clothes that he's also concerned to see how they live their lives outside the clothes that they wear. Because sometimes your clothes determine who you are, whereas at other times your clothes are completely different. Even one may even go further than that and say that there are particular roads in the world today which are known to be roads which represent the fashion industry. You come to London, for example, you'll see New Bond Street or Knightsbridge or Kensington. You go to America, you'll see Fifth Avenue. You'll go to Paris and you'll see Champs-Élysées. You'll go virtually everywhere in the world, and that there is a road which is devoted to the world of clothing. And sometimes you see some of the designs within these shops, you wonder who would even wear anything like that. I've seen certain designs in some of these stores where you look at the people and you wonder about these designers. But the fact is that a small tick or a small horse or 3 lines or indeed LV are of the utmost importance to some of our characters. Because without them, sometimes we are not built up as being human beings. You will find sometimes some people, and I'm the first to speak, you'll find sometimes there are some people who will travel with Louis Vuitton luggage. Every bag is virtually the same, but this one which has 800 pieces of LVs on the top sounds much better. And you will find some of these stores which are looking for this LV, and there are people who are willing to pay 5,000, 6,000 just for that piece of luggage. Because to them, all these identify themselves. And anyone who's going to Louis Vuitton and Prada, Alexander McQueen, John Galliano, you see one after another, the world of fashion and all these names emerge. You see how the human being is so taken by the clothes that he wears. Hence one notices, for example, in the UK, you have a famous event called Ascot. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Ascot. It's a horse racing event. Ascot is not so concerned with horse racing, although the main point really is for you to go and watch horses. On the contrary, Ascot is more concerned with what hats are on display. And sometimes you see some people wearing a chessboard on their head, sometimes a person wearing a pigeon, sometimes a person wearing a bowl of fruits. And these people will plan 1 year ahead about what should cover their head. Imagine that, 1 year ahead. And that's why the human being is always concerned about